Okay. Hi, Alexander. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Thanks, Jeremy, for inviting me.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for joining the podcast. So you're in the Dream podcast. Data rules everything around me, and
Okay.
I'm happy to discuss with you because I've been following your work on LinkedIn. I've been following your posts. You've been quite vocal about AI, what's the future of AI, all about
Mm-hmm.
regulation. So as it's a very pressing topic, we hear a lot about that. OpenAI has even gone to the policymakers to say that they need to regulate the AI industry. So I'm very curious into getting into this sort of conversation with you where we're going to deep dive into the ins and outs of this industry, and of course, learn about you, and learn about your drive, learn about your vision. It's all about three simple questions that I always try to ask to anybody that I record the podcast with is what's your story? What's your drive? What's your vision? And it's basically a free flow conversation that we can go through. So let's do it.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. So maybe a short background, yeah, about
Yep.
myself. Yeah, sure. So I've been for a huge chunk of my life, professional life, commercial contracts lawyer, and I've been serving either as an in-house counsel in different organizations, like Siemens, for example. I was working on commercial projects which Siemens did, and back then I was still in Russia, so I was working as a Russian lawyer initially, and from time to time I also practiced law in law firms. So it changed, the roles changed. Sometimes I was a in-house lawyer, sometimes I was a consultant, external consultant to companies. And then a little bit later, in 2015, I started transforming myself into an IT focused lawyer. So for that purpose, I got my second legal degree from the University of Edinburgh. I did that by distance learning, and I got a lot of stuff to think about thanks to the course materials there, and they included a lot of stuff on the regulation of autonomous systems, so something you would not normally hear about in a serious sense in policy circles in 2015. So that was a matter of, yeah, academic discussion, yes, but not really something that would be discussed around, regulation, real regulation. Something more hypothetical, but possibly. And now we see, as you see, it all begins to materialize. So,
Exactly.
which started for me in 2015. Now is being materialized, and also, of course, yeah, and I didn't immediately end up advising on AI related projects. The things I did initially was more data protection related. So I was helping out companies to build their business processes in compliance with data protection laws all around the world. And one important regulation, which was an important one then, was GDPR, which
Hmm.
was initially in the draft, at the draft stage when I started learning, and when I completed my studies, it was already enacted and waiting for to be applied, and there was a grace period for the companies to prepare. And so I helped out some companies to prepare for this regulation. So those who were supposed to enter the European markets. So this is what I did, and there was a bit of machine learning projects as well. So apart from the Bitcoin and ICO craze of 2017, which I witnessed. And back then I was a senior manager at Deloitte, so I was a lawyer, senior lawyer and manager there. And we did support businesses on crypto projects as well. And then eventually, what was really more interesting for me, were these projects where I advised on how to really make sure that during model building, when you are building a machine learning model, you are staying still also in compliance with regulations and best practices in the industry as well. So some call that ethics, some call that just best practices, however you call it, meaning that it's not yet hard law, but there are some ideas around how you should really do that, or what you should not really do. And and it assumes to be, it is sometimes assumed to be understood, sometimes not. So it's this kind of stuff. And then of course, there was this opportunity at some point. So I started working on policy more directly. So I was at one point advising companies and doing some support services for projects, and working with project people, with project managers and so on. And then there was this opportunity to start working in policy directly, to help out with drafting regulations around, again, data protection, and then the framework for the future regulation of AI and robotics. That was back in 2019. I did that, and I did that in Russia, but also on an international level. I was one of the members of the working groups in the World Economic Forum. I mean, they were coming up with some ideas around updating globally the regulation of data protection. So giving out some suggestions for some governments maybe to follow if they find it useful. And I participated in this kind of project, or even a couple of projects with the World Economic Forum, where we analyzed what is problematic maybe with the notice and consent framework, which is currently in place in most countries. So what could be updated, what could be made to improve how things work generally, around that. And then a little bit later, there was this opportunity to start working at the Council of Europe. And I took that opportunity and moved to France, to Strasbourg, where I'm currently still, but not in the capacity of a special advisor to the Council of Europe, which I did. And that was it was the case between 2021 May and May 2022. I did that policy job at the Council of Europe. I advised the Secretariat. I was working inside the Secretariat to help out with drafting analytical information, reports, and suggestions for discussions around the upcoming, and now it's already being negotiated, the upcoming European Convention on AI. So this is what the Council of Europe currently does. They are doing this in parallel to the European Union. So this is a separate thing, not to be confused. And then I was also unfortunately affected by the recent political developments, and as I hold a Russian passport, I was forced to terminate my connection with the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe requested all Russian.
They disconnected all the Russians from European Council?
At least, those who were either seconded like me or who were on temporary contracts, they were not prolonged. Those who are working on permanent contracts, I think they are less affected, although I think they are also affected. So moved to some secondary roles now, but that's just political situation right now. So it affects people, even though some people have absolutely nothing to do with this.
Yeah,
Because,
I assume you have
yeah,
absolutely nothing to do with the current
yeah.
situation. Yep.
So then, and then basically what I started to do is to be more active on social media, first of all, and you've noticed me thanks to that
Yep.
effort as well from my side. And I'm writing a newsletter on AI and digital policy, and everybody can subscribe and feel free to do that as well.
Yep.
And I'm consulting companies and I'm consulting governments, so private and public sector clients on both policy matters related to AI and more practical issues where, for example, concrete companies would like to know what they really need to do in terms of business procedures, processes, in order to comply with certain regulations which are already in place and which relate to, let's say, data processing or algorithmic decision making, and the upcoming regulations or the drafts which are being discussed. And we know, let's say, that, for example, for the EU AI Act, I mean, yeah, there are still matters to be discussed. There are still issues to be debated in the parliament and during the trilogues. But still, there is some more or less general consensus around certain issues. So we'll be sure to we can expect something already, and we can predict that we can already prepare, if we are an organization, for what we can already start preparing for, right? So in terms of processes. So this is what I do, yeah. And for example, in terms of public policy projects, the last thing which I did was helping out a think tank in Kyrgyzstan. So it's a country in Central Asia. With the draft regulation, which would be the part of codified digital regulation, and the part which I dealt with was concerned with artificial intelligence systems. So basically, what I did, I was very much inspired by the European regulation, which is coming up, but I had to compress it and strip it down to the most basic principles and provisions, to make it feasible to comply with the derivative regulation for it to be possible, for it to be feasible for a small country like Kyrgyzstan, without a lot of bureaucracy, without a lot of subject matter experts on AI. So it's a challenge, of course, and you cannot really have something as comprehensive as the EU AI Act in a small country, in a small market like Kyrgyzstan, or any similar jurisdiction.
Country.
Yes, it's not possible. So I've made an adaptation, a simplified version, so to say, of course, with some additional ideas which were drawn from also some American instruments, which they have now, not in the way of law, but they have some recommendations and some further ideas from OECD, for example, which gave its recommendations on AI and policy in 2019. And some people may have already noticed that recently, for example, the European Parliament, when they discussed what could be the definition of AI, they took the definition from the OECD recommendation, because the initial one, which the European Commission proposed, was a little bit different. It was similar to a significant degree, but it was a little bit different in some aspects. And now they made it totally compatible, to make sure that there is some alignment between regulatory instruments on a global
Okay.
scale.
Yeah, because there
So
is a current.
that is making sense.
Yeah, I think there is a current big topic on all of this. I have the funny saying is U.S. innovates, Europe regulates. So
Mm,
I'm always finding this funny, but actually, U.S. also regulates and have also their set of rules and principle. So it's really interesting your background. You went from being a lawyer and consul in Russia to work for a different organization, to come here in Europe, work for the European Committee, work for the
Council of
World,
Europe, yeah. Hmm.
Council of
Hmm.
Europe, also working for the World Economic Forum. Impressive background, really. It's all you've
Thank
done,
you.
and everything that you have been working on is quite impressive. Um, I have a few questions, obviously, because what comes to my mind first as an entrepreneur in data is how much of those principles can really be activated at at a company level. Because there is, let's be very honest here, like most of the time companies and things, they don't understand much about legal, and it seems like legal stuff,
Mm,
legal like entities or bodies like
mm,
this do not really understand fully what's going on inside companies. And it's been
mm,
like kind of a thing like, yeah, they regulate, but do they
mm,
understand all the topic? No, they don't. Obviously, they
mm,
don't, but at least they need to set a certain framework for and
mm.
for understanding. So you were talking about a few basic principles. Can you give us three basic principles that everybody needs to have in mind, for example?
Mm, sure. So usually when we are talking about, let's say, developing AI systems, machine learning nowadays mostly, right?
Mm.
What you usually want to have is at least some basic setup to manage risk. So, and this is also, for example, prescribed by the draft EU AI Act. So that basically the idea that you should have AI risk management, which is a little bit different, not necessarily separate from the general enterprise risk management. So, and this is also, of course, more maybe familiar to those who were in large corporations where there might have been a risk manager really as a separate role, and not that much really in smaller companies. But anyway, there are these provisions in the law which just assume that at least that what you are doing, and for that purpose you have set up a certain uh, framework, like you have a policy around assessing what you are doing and how much risk and what kind of risk it causes to whom inside the organization, outside the organization, right? So because of your activities, and then after you identify those risks, you somehow manage them, treat them, and document the processes. So there is someone who is responsible. It's either a committee or a one person officer, but somebody, and it may be delegated to someone whose function is not solely managing risk, but he may be or she may be doing that in addition. But there should be something in the company which assumes to be building
So it's about risk
AI
management.
systems. Yeah, it's a huge chunk of what is necessary, because if you start thinking about how to implement this risk management, there are some frameworks for this. And for example, there is this a new American one, the NIST risk management framework, NIST RMF, and it has been released end of January, I think, this year, so very recently. but people are studying it in terms of what it contains, what the procedures are there, because it's really helpful to have some guidance in this sense. And this NIST risk AI risk management framework provides such guidance. But there are also others, for example, that I know of. There is this For Humanity a risk management framework, and in this case, so the NIST, of course, is the American Institute of Standards, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, if I remember correctly, the full name. So standard setting organization, right? And For Humanity is a non-profit which also originated in the United States, but now has a lot of collaborators all across the world. That I'm also a collaborator, I'm a contributor to this non-profit in terms of voluntary activity. What we do there as experts is just we try to identify what are the requirements there in the regulations and how we can translate them into actual practices. So if we take a look, for example, on this particular sense, let's stay with the EU AI Act as an example. So we see an article in risk management. We identify what would be the operating practices which should be followed by an organization, because there are certain expectations in the law, right? So the law does not necessarily prescribe to you the exact way of doing things. Like
Yes.
it usually asks you to achieve a certain results, and then it will punish you if you don't do so, right?
Yeah.
But how to do so is usually it's a procedure, and it's the most practical thing. And this is what people in such communities nowadays are working on, exactly establishing, identifying those practices which could lead us to the results which the regulators expect. And then we identify those practices, we summarize, discuss them, and provide, we draft a guidance for the companies what they could do to enable regulatory compliance. So it's very important, I think, for every company which is building systems, to take a look at those frameworks, to take a look at NIST air risk management framework, to take a look at For Humanity frameworks, and also other frameworks which may be in place and might be in place in the future, because it's a developing field. So pay close attention to that, because people are trying actually to help out companies and smaller ones, especially because they lack guidance to see how it can be implemented. Yeah, and this is just based on one example of what we have started to discuss about one basic requirements to have some kind of risk management in place to identify and estimate and manage risk. Then, of course, there are data governance requirements more generally, because of course, you cannot just randomly select what datasets you want to use for a certain project. You need to be consciously taking a lot of decisions around designing like the pipeline of your model, and initially the data collection process, like from the start to the very end. You need to be conscious and actually documenting what you are doing, the decisions. The decisions, they need to be taken with consideration, with discussions, and of course proper data management process and data governance process would mean that you have a policy in place which sets your expectations of how your organization is supposed to do that, right? And then there are sub processes what you need to follow, and then there will be documentary evidence that you did all that which is prescribed by your own policy. So you agreed to follow those rules, and now here is the evidence which may be then later on be provided to some third-party auditor, right? So he or she may take a look at those docs and see, okay, I think those guys were pretty much diligent in what they did. They were, exercising a certain standard of care, which is expected from them or expected from anyone working in a similar role in a similar industry for a similar project, right? So,
Yeah.
and of course, it will all depend on the concrete project and what we are doing. But let's say if there are personal data involved, yeah, of course, we need to comply with the data protection regulations. If we are collecting only non-personal data, there may be some other regulations which we need to take into account and document our compliance. So, yeah. So basically, what we are usually talking about, like having some standards around doing things and having some evidence of following those standards, be it voluntary standards or mandatory later on, which would be coming up. Because, for example, the European Commission has already asked the Senelec, it's a there is a joint technical committee there in those standard setting organizations in Europe, which is now tasked with coming up with standards on artificial intelligence, which would support again the work in organizations on ensuring like how to actually perform all those procedures which are expected to be in place according to the to the draft EU-AI Act. Yeah, and of course this means that the companies will have a grace period to adapt, and the standard setting bodies will have a time. I'm not sure it will be enough, but let's hope, to come up with actual implementation standards, because in at least in Europe there is this presumption that if you have followed the standards, it is presumed that you have complied with the law, which is based on which those standards are based on. So this is a presumption of compliance. So it's good when a company is able to demonstrate it has complied with some harmonized standards. That makes things easier to in terms of demonstrating compliance. But the problem is like currently the standards are still in development. So we know some ideas from the Act. We have some frameworks to structure our work right now. So we can already start, let's say if we are in Europe, start preparing to be compliant in the future with this regulation. And if we are elsewhere, of course, there are some, and even if we are Europe, there are already existing regulations which need to be dealt with. So I would see data governance and risk management as one of the main things to be considered when, let's say, building machine learning models. I think I've lost the sound. I'm not sure if I can.
Sorry. So what I was asking is, okay, so you talked, so my point was like, is there three things that we need to have in mind? What you said is like, think about the framework that are in place already. Think about data governance and how you use stuff, like how you build your pipeline. And the third thing would be sure you can provide evidence, basically.
Yeah, you can formulate it like that. Yeah, that's a way to put it as well.
Okay. Another question, Alexander. So, okay, so that's really key to the adoption of AI to be able to, provide transparency. But we all know that it's a black box right here inside the models. Like the AI models are literally a black box. The builders of the AI systems themselves, they don't know how back propagation algorithm actually impact the way the AI system is built. There is this guy inside AI, I don't remember his name, who quit Google. He's been like the godfather of AI. He's been working there for thousands of years. I don't know, but he literally left Google to speak out and be like, oh, we should be careful about AI systems. We don't. I'm scared about that because people can use it. And basically, his point is, as we are in a competitive space, we cannot really stop. That would be an escalation of who developed the bigger model, who developed the bigger things, and the more efficient one. So there is a lot of concerns into. Is AI going to be a threat for humanity, not a threat for humanity? There is a bit of over, to me it's too much. I don't see this as very accurate right now. When you're using ChatGPT as a user, you're like, oh, there is limitation in there. That sometimes it hallucinates, or so. And there's a disconnection to like the experience of the users currently. What those guys are saying, are they saying this for the right intention, or are they trying to put themselves in front of the media, as the fact that Sam Altman, it's the CEO of OpenAI went to different countries to speak out, is also some kind of thing that you don't really know if it's bullshit or not. Really, to be really clear, are they really intending to help into this regulation, knowing that they don't know what's going on in their black box anyway? Or are they trying to put their competitive advantage and to position themselves as the company that will actually be the only one ruling how things are getting done? Because when you look at Sam Altman and what he did, he literally came out to the regulators like, oh, this is why you should regulate AI. And then when the European Act started rolling out and we're talking about it, he was like, no, 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 but make sure that if there is regulation in place, we could go if this doesn't fit our standard. He literally kind of balance between those two areas. So I was really curious to push this conversation a bit further, because now we understood your story, we understood what's your drive. You sound like a very committed person into how things are done, and I see you as a translator basically between the two words.
Oh yeah,
As you as
yeah, I did a lot of translation also between the worlds of the business guys and, let's say, the data guys and the policy guys. So
Yeah.
I know how they perceive the world, and they perceive the world differently. Of course, the policy people, the business people, and on the other hand, the tech guys. It's a totally different, well, not totally, but significantly diverging worldviews, and
Mm.
it's natural, because we are, because of our education, about because of our lived experience, we tend to focus on different things. And me myself, I also understand my biases. For example, as
Mm.
a lawyer by nature, I tend to focus on risk, right? And some entrepreneurs who are maybe doing the entrepreneurial thing for 20 years will be focused more on opportunity, right? And it's okay, because we need to be all in the room: the tech guys, the entrepreneurial types, the risk management guys, the policy people, people who know a thing or two about ethics. So, and I mean, it's always nice to have multidisciplinary teams working all on projects in companies and on policy in the public sector. It's always nice if the policies which are being enacted are science based, so they are not based on something which is invented by someone, and
Mm.
ideally they should follow academic literature. They should follow empirical evidence about what works, what does not work, also in terms of regulation. And then also they need to hear and be open to hearing the input from the industry, because if you over-regulate, of course, you will punish those who are supplying new products and offering your citizens the new quality of life, and it will not be right to do so. I mean, to
Can we stop on
over-regulate as
this?
well.
Can we stop on
Yes.
this? I think you touch a very interesting point, which is, why are we doing all this regulation and stuff? Is It sounds like what you talked about, the citizen. It sounds like it's all about the people. And is it going to harm or is it not going to harm citizens? Uh, I think that's the essence of the question of regulation. Like it's all about. We talked about risk. Okay, but risk is like a general term. It's about, is it going to harm my son, mother, if they use AI in some way? It's like any kind of tool at the end of the day. Like if you think about it, it's just about, is how is it going to harm people? Why is it going to harm people? And how to prevent that it's going to harm people. Is that correct? Is that a good way of seeing this?
I mean, there are different ways of seeing what regulation does and what's the intention of those who regulate. But generally, it will be just ordering the society and making it function properly and without any issues, because of course usually what we do in the current economy, we believe in free markets, but they sometimes fail, right? So there are sometimes monopolies and so on. And although governments usually welcome the private initiative in terms of building some new products and some stuff which would be nice to have, then of course there will be some situations where the markets will fail in terms of like companies colluding with each other to set unreasonably high prices, or to monopolize, to corner the market for itself. Like let's perhaps think about a situation when somebody will be asking the regulators, after he or she has done his homework and created something new, innovative, and okay, and now we should stop. Please don't allow anyone in the room. I'm happy
Yeah,
with this situation, right?
that's what I meant. That's what I wanted to
Yeah,
get to.
so and then the regulation, of course, should also prevent this kind of thing happening, the cornering of markets by some oligopolies or monopolies, and this is the objective as well. Although you are right, yes, the protection of citizens and their safety is also a concern, but as well, if we are touching upon, let's say, a question of fundamental rights, at least in Europe, it is, besides the usual freedoms which everybody knows about, the freedom of information, let's say, or the right to privacy, right? So these are all well-known things which I think a lot of people know about. Not everybody knows, for example, that the freedom to conduct business is also a constitutional right in Europe.
Oh, okay.
It's a thing, yeah. And what may not be present in other charter type documents. So we have this Charter of Fundamental Rights in European Union, and it provides this right as well. And what, for example, those who apply the law, and in particular the courts, when there is a certain dispute, what they are supposed to do is, usually when there is a major conflict of interests and it results in some judicial battle, they have to really balance those fundamental rights which exist, because no right by itself is absolute. So of course there is a right to life, let's say, or right to privacy or whatnot, but there are still exceptions. You can kill enemy soldiers and you will not be punished for that, right? So there is an exception to the right to life. There is a right to privacy, but you are, like, as a government agency, allowed to surveil a certain person if you obtain a court approval or follow some other judicial or legal procedure. You can infringe on privacy just because you need to ensure public safety. Maybe you are looking for a terrorist, right? So it is never a situation where we are never in a situation where, like, there is a certain fundamental right which is trumping all others. So it's always a case-by-case analysis let's say, by a court in a case of a dispute, what rights should be given priority based actually on the value judgments, which are and again driven by policy considerations, driven by prior jurisprudence, but it's all, you know, stuff which has come into being eventually historically, and it's changing. So we of course have seen how new rights has been established, how, for example, we eventually came to the understanding that it's not good to discriminate people based on gender, on you know, race or whatnot. So we have eventually, you know, incorporated all those provisions into jurisprudence, into law, and you know, new rights have been added, and that means that the work of the courts or whoever is applying the law is eventually getting more complicated, more complex, because there are more and more considerations and interests to be, you know, balanced against each other, because there are different, you know, the interests of people, the interests of enterprises, but they also in the end serve ideally to benefit the society, right? So for us to
benefit
enjoy
the society.
to enjoy new wonderful products which may make our life easier, hopefully, and not worse, and so on. So it's a huge issue of balancing. You always
It's about balance. I agree. One maybe last question about things that really touch me personally is open source models and open source world in general. As you know, NAS, we are working on something open source by nature, and we believe in open source being the true only way to go.
This is the way.
So I don't know. Closed source model seems to me like you know, there is a bit of things that we need to put in place. Like, obviously, people think that having models closed source enable them to actually fine tune them in a way that is for the greater good. So that's how OpenAI sees it. At least they say, "Oh, we are just because if we open source our weights, if we give our weights, the weights we use in the model, then people can reuse it and do no good for people, etc." So there is a bit of things around. Okay.
And they will lose all profits.
And they will lose all profits. And they will lose all profits.
Yeah, so
one
important
one very important
thing.
topic. So there is a thing about, you know, open source models. Is it really possible to open source a black box, which is a model, a binary file at the end of the day, or is it the weights of a model and the data that is collected that needs to be open source? Like, I've been training my data on this data set. The weights I apply to the model are those weights, and then eventually this becomes a binary file of a model that can be reused for execution or whatever. So it's a big question, and a lot of open source thinkers are now trying to figure out what exactly open source means in the context of models, of AI models. What's your take on open source, considering that in the AI European Act, they will ask for transparency on what data did you use and what's your weight? Is open source the only way for you? So you think, or is it, you know, is there an intention from the regulational bodies to force public and private users or builders of AI models to be transparent about how they created that?
Yeah, so I think there is an expectation of more transparency in terms of what data is being used and how models are being built, but it's not necessarily by means of open sourcing the model or weights or whatnot. So there would be, let's say, if we are taking the example of the AI Act, there will be requirements to disclose certain information, to provide documentation. If you are talking about, distributing an AI system, just for the purpose of being clear, let's say, what are the limitations of the system. As you may have seen recently, even some lawyers are not aware that, you cannot really trust some system, generative AI system of, searching for some case law, which happened recently with American lawyers. They were assuming that the information which they obtained from the generative AI chatbot would be as dependable as something they have researched on their own, using some high quality legal information research system, right? So it's different stuff, it's a different system, and they didn't even understand the difference, like how you should approach this kind of system and that kind of system. So the quality and the accuracy, of course, metrics are very different, right? Based on what the data has been used and what is the process for coming up with the results. So of course there is this transparency requirement, which serves exactly that purpose, to help out consumers and prosumers, professional consumers as well, in an enterprise setting, to just better and more properly use those systems. But it's not necessarily on the level of source code and so on. So far we are seeing,
I see.
We are
So
seeing
it's more about the process.
It's more about the process and just disclaimers, understanding, and helping out the end users and consumers just to use the product, because the AI system in the end is a product, to use this product correctly and without harming others and themselves. So this is the main thrust for this transparency requirement.
Thank you, Aleksandr. It's been a very insightful conversation. I really enjoyed the whole story of you going through all your journey and getting to that point where now it's all about AI and data. And I think you guys at a concert, at a low level, needs to play a big role into helping out people understand how to also trust those tools. And I think it's all about this. It's all about how can we make sure people trust the tool they use and are sure, like by trust, I mean they can rely on it, and they can also know that they can be not harmed from it, or that anyone close to them cannot be harmed by the fact that they use this system. So it's a very central question. I think we're going to hear a lot more about it in the coming weeks, years ahead. And I was glad to be able to talk to you about it today. So thank you.
Yeah, I was also happy. And maybe next time, as a next topic for our further discussion, touching on this exactly, the issue of trust, I would propose we could discuss the ideas around third-party AI audits, like how can a third party can come and check what the developer is doing and make assurances towards the public without disclosing the proprietary information, but like being trusted, as an auditor, assuring the public, I've checked it, it's okay. So, and this is, I think, is key about building trust, because, relying on some, first-party statements is one thing, but some independent third-party verifying those, I mean, it's a different story. So I think this definitely would be nice to discuss.
Yeah, that would be for part 2. So until next time, Aleksandr, thank you so much for this conversation today, and have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye, Jeremy.